לא נותר לי רק להגיד תודה רבה לכל המשתתפים, לאיתן, לאיתמר, לניבה, לליאת, לרן, תודה רבה לנורית, למערכים, ואני מקווה שהשארנו אתכם לפחות עם טעם של סיפור, זה סיפור, זה סיפור. תודה.
תודה רבה. תודה רבה. אז אנחנו מגיעים לחצי שעה האחרונה. I'll switch to English for our guests. I would like to introduce the chair of this final session, which will allow time for questions, right? People have been asking, when can we ask questions? So this is the time. I'll invite Ruth Weinstein, who is the Director of Health Promotion of the Israel Ministry of Health and co-sponsor of this conference and a great supporter of all activities in social marketing. Ruth, please.
Thank you, Norit. Toda. I'll try to speak in English, even though it's sometimes difficult. I'd like to invite Professor Hastings to join me here, and we'll try to look at what we talked about today and leave some room for questions. Please. I see the room is getting less and less crowded, but all the important people are here. That's interesting. I wanted to thank Professor Hastings. I think it was an amazing day, and I think you started off by giving us a lot to think about. I came across your articles. I maybe got to 4%. And it was very interesting because when Norit talked to me about your coming here, the next day I was on a plane going to a meeting about obesity, and I took a nice book by Jaap Seidel about obesity, childhood obesity, and I opened it up, and there was an article by Professor Hastings about marketing to children. And I must say, I fell in love with you then. And
I told you not to tell anyone.
We just met today. And it continued when you presented the picture of Nelson Mandela, who's one of my heroes. And I just finished his autobiography recently. So that I knew, your being here is important. I also feel that there's so many similarities with health promotion, which is my field. One of the things you wrote about in one of the articles I did read was that it takes a lot of time and planning. And the social marketing plan includes defining long-term aims, identifying key drivers and players, setting clear and measurable objectives. And we talk about very similar things for health promotion. Also, with health promotion, we usually are left with more questions than with answers. And I feel some people told me during the break, this is really good, it's really interesting, but we didn't get the answers we came for. People looked for some kind of recipe. There isn't a recipe. We're all looking for the answers. I don't know if that's any comfort to us, but we're here together. I liked how you talked about it not being a level playing field sometimes. It's not. I think it was very interesting, the response to Nihaya, my friend sitting in the audience here. That was a true spontaneous reaction of the audience when Nihaya started talking something that sounded political. Facts about where the Arab population is in relationship to the Jewish population, how the gap is only expanding. As policymakers, I'm part of the Ministry of Health. We have to look at that. We have to look at populations. We have to do segmentation. We have to see where we need to strengthen our work. one of the questions I wanted to ask you is something that we've been thinking about. Chaim is sitting here in the audience, Mr. Smoke-Free, and it ties up with what Nihaya brought here. We know that the rates of smoking in Arab men are very high. In Jewish population, it's going down, and it continues to go down. In Arab men, it's staying about the same, almost 50%. And we haven't done any work there. And when we think about it, we have committees and we have more committees, and we're talking about how do we reach the population. We haven't really asked the population yet. One of my fantasies is to frame it as kind of in a political framework. If you're an Arab man smoking, you're giving in to the right-wing dream of getting rid of Arabs. Now, I don't think we can say that. I don't think I can say that as the Ministry of Health. That's the sort of thing that maybe it would work. Do you have any response to that?
Gosh, I feel I am treading in very, very dangerous territory here. But, oh, sod it. Well, I think, first of all, there's always a temptation, isn't it, to think that our own circumstances, yours in Israel and Palestine, ours in the UK, are unique. But in many ways, there are some remarkable similarities. We have the most appalling health inequalities in the UK. If you come to the UK, you will think this is a modern, civilized country with, every possible benefit for people. But in WHO research of just a couple of years ago showed that male life expectancy in parts of Glasgow, near where I live, has dipped to 54 years of age. And it is truly shocking. Partly it's shocking because we have the data. Many places don't have this data. I don't think it's that Glasgow is I think Glasgow is particularly bad, but I don't think it's exceptional. I think there's those sorts of inequalities. You saw it in Hurricane Katrina. The immense, who suffered in Hurricane Katrina? It was, by and large, the poor and the black. So this is not exceptional. You also see it in some countries that have native populations that's like in I'm thinking of the Maori in New Zealand, or the Aborigines in Australia, or the First Nation in North America. Again, you have massive disparities in public health, and very often these are driven by smoking, if only because smoking is so lethal. I mean, it kills 1 in 2. That is, so in the west of Scotland, when we have these great disparities, people estimate that two-thirds of that, half to two-thirds of that disparity is directly attributable to tobacco alone. But then when you add in poor diet and lack of exercise, and it is very difficult. I have friends in the west of Scotland who live these sorts of incredibly unhealthy lifestyles. And I feel it is almost a political statement on their part. Now, they've not got the sort of prejudice and division that you have here, not as overt as that. But they do feel when people like me come along and say, you shouldn't smoke, they do think that if they were to listen to me, they would be betraying their roots in some way. They would somehow be denying their very self-worth. So I think the secret is a very challenging one, but it's one Nelson Mandela came up with, is that you turn this round so that smoking can be, rather than an act of rebellion or cultural suicide even, I think that is an option that human species takes sometimes if they see no hope, that you can turn that round and make it something positive. And let me share with you a little addendum to the Nelson Mandela story, because I have been in the West Bank and I told that story there. And afterwards, somebody came up to me and said, what is more, it works. He had been arrested during the first Intifada, and on the 3rd day of incarceration, the guard came in and put 4 cigarettes down on the table in his cell, and no cigarette lighter. and walked out. And he said at that point, I gave up. Still smoking now, but he gave up then. But it's, that's a universal truth, I fear, that we all need to feel we are in some way in control of our own fate. And if we lose that sense of some control of our own fate, then our capacity to take control over our own lives is greatly diminished. And essentially, if you look at what public health has learnt over the last 100 years since John Snow did the hand pump routine, what we have learnt is that there are things that we as individuals can do to make our lives healthier, happier and longer. Things we can do. But that presupposes we have some sort of power and some sort of agency and some sort of capacity to sit in the driving seats of our own lives. And the further you are down the economic, political, cultural pecking order, the less you have those skills.
One of the things we're encountering, and I don't see Shlomit now, who asked about the physical activity, what it should be called and how it should be called. This you talked about it also. We also have to reach the politicians. We have to reach the level there who's telling us, yes, people are choosing. These are the people that are choosing to smoke. They're bad people. These are the people that are becoming fatter. They're bad people. They're not looking so much as we are as changing the environment, changing what people have access to. And they're demanding of us is to say, well, do you want to call it sport or do you want to call it physical activity? And we're not even there. If we're working from 7 in the morning till 7 at night, who the hell is going to tell me to go walk around the block afterwards? It doesn't matter if they call it sport or physical activity. I don't want to do it. I don't have the time. But they're telling us this is how we have to, this is what we have to focus on.
You're right again. I think there is clearly a need to focus on more than the blaming of the victim, the people who are in these very difficult circumstances and making decisions. I was about to trip myself up there and say making bad decisions. I don't think they are making bad decisions. I think when you're standing in that place, then it seems like a good decision. It reminds me a bit of jumping fields, but the argument that's sometimes put that prison is so soft people don't mind going there, and if you've got to a society where people find prison a preferable option, an attractive option, then there is something deeply wrong with their lives on the outside that is the case. So you have to keep battling away at that argument. Maybe the strongest sort of hard economic argument I've come across of recent is, I don't know whether you're familiar with a British book that appeared called The Spirit Level. Yeah, and it's Wilkinson and Pickett, that's right. And they argue... Sorry, do you want to say something else?
Yeah, it was a question I wanted to ask you. The spirit level, all the problems that you just described during all the conference, they're more like problems that you deal from up to bottom. And I'm asking because this is a lot of criticism going now on the internet, is the fact that all the problems is a problem of economical structure. That means a lot of capitalism, a lot of privatization, a lot of consumerism, a lot of problems that if we don't have the economical structure that we have today all over the world, the neoliberalism, we not have them in the first place. So how can you look from those problems, from smoking, alcoholism, violence, all those kind of problems, from an economical perspective?
Okay. A number of things wrapped up in what you've said. Let me try and unpick it a little bit. First of all, just to stick with the spirit level for a moment, to explain to people that Wilkinson and Pickett did a very thorough look at public health data, epidemiological data across the world. And what they were able to establish is that in unequal societies, even the rich are worse off than in fair societies. So the fact that you live in an unequal society damages your quality of life, if only because there is nobody to clean your house, there is no public transport service, there is no public hospital. these impinge on you. Even if you don't use them, they impinge on you because the public hospital trains the doctors that will work in the private hospital. So there is a gain for everybody in greater equality, which is counterintuitive, but they manage to show that that is definitively the case. The issue, there's two other issues I think wrapped in what you're saying. You know, when you're dealing with somebody's poor health behaviour, but there is a political context that is profoundly unhelpful, or an economic context that's profoundly unhelpful, I think you have to acknowledge that. You can't just ignore that and say, well, I'm still going to talk about condoms or whatever it might be. And I remember a good friend who went on to work a lot in tobacco control, but started in HIV/AIDS work, working in poor parts of Edinburgh. And they were going in to do safe sex interventions. And they realised very rapidly that what people needed more than anything else was help with their finances. Not money, they didn't have money to give them, but they could give them counselling on debt advice and so on. And that's what people really needed. Having given them a bit of advice on that, it was then the door was then open to discuss safer sex. So it's this exchange idea. You know, I'm listening to you. So, you know, BMW do this, don't they? You know, I go to BMW and say, you know, I'm really worried about the environment. I'm concerned that it's you know, about global warming, climate change, etc., etc. So they'll say, yeah, okay, we'll give you a nice BMW, but it'll be a green BMW. Even if they just paint it green, it will be a green BMW. You know, I know they can't produce something that's going to be completely neutral carbon-wise, but they will try and move towards me as best they can within the limits of both technological possibilities and profitability. And that's really how the deal works. You don't expect to go down to your local shop and get things for nothing, but if they give you a bit of tip now and again, or you know, they let you pay them the money tomorrow to slip out of the vernacular, then you're thinking, well, yeah, it's a good shop, I'll go back there again, and you'll build a relationship with them. And that's what loyalty cards are about, it's what air miles are about, it's building up that sort of loyalty. But it's essentially about exchange, each party recognising something of value in the other's perception of the world. Finally, this top-down, bottom-up, I think the answer inevitably has to be that it needs to be both. And I'll give you as an example of that, smoke-free legislation in Scotland, which was, you know, in many ways was absolute classic example of top-down, because it was, you know, the Prime Minister had to make a decision to do this and then enact a law which said you'll get into serious trouble if you smoke in public places. You couldn't have got more didactic or top-down. But actually, they also did a fantastic job of getting the public on board. Interestingly, not quite on their own terms, because the messaging that came out of the Scottish Government was quite hard-hitting and went for issues about cancer and lung cancer in particular that passive smoking could cause. I don't think the Scottish public really bought into that. What they did buy into was the fact that if you go down the pub and everybody's smoking, you have to wash your hair and your clothes all stink. And it was a much more cosmetic sort of issue. But it was nonetheless important to their quality of life. You know, as medics, the people in the government were inclined to think that cancer was the thing that really mattered. But if you're going down the pub every week, then the washing bill also matters. It sounds trivial, but it mattered to people. But suffice it to say, these two came together in a sort of perfect calm, if you will, as opposed to a perfect storm. So when smoke-free legislation came in, it was incredibly popular. It was the single most popular bit of legislation in the entire government programme. In a 4-year government. It was astonishing. There was one public opinion survey that I still remember the statistic from, although it's several years ago now. And one of the questions was an agree-disagree scale. And one of the statements in that series of statements was, one of the statements was, this legislation is something that Scotland can be proud of. Now, I suspect that's quite similar if you said this legislation is something that Israel can be proud of, or Palestine can be proud of. You would immediately get the vast majority of that means something very, very powerful to people. And amongst the youngest demographic that were interviewed, 16 to 24-year-olds, 84% agreed with that. So that's virtually universal and a very, very strong measure. And so, yes, it was top-down, but the bottom-up was there as well, and you get the two together. Then it's a bit like that hug commercial, you know, the hands come together, and it's very powerful.
Any other questions, remarks? Yes.
I have a question. I think that was quite broad in terms of approaching social marketing from a commercial perspective on some level, but also on the public health side of things. But I guess my question can apply to both sides of things, which is there are a lot of topics which gather a lot of popular support, like obesity amongst children or smoking in countries other than Israel, etc. But like there are some topics which are considered more sexy, you can say, and then there are the topics which are not sexy at all. I work in the field of mental health and stigma and creating opportunities for people. So when we're talking about שיווק חברתי and שינוי חברתי, this is one of the fields where you see that much as you're going to try to do your שיווק, like it's actually one of the less sexy things. It's also one of the topics that, let's say, corporates are going to be less willing to take on. And I guess it's just a question, like, when you have, let's say, the sexy topics, like if you take breast cancer awareness, which has taken a lot of popular support, sometimes the risk in marketing methods is that it overshadows the ability to commit to other issues as well. And I don't know if you have any comments to make about the use of marketing commercializing these issues on some level can create a lot of damage. Perhaps that's what we were talking about earlier this morning, like the dangers of taking certain approaches and taking on certain issues as opposed to others.
Yeah, again, thank you for the question. It's a very complex and nuanced one. It brought to mind actually an incident a few years ago. I gave a talk in Australia, which I think you're from Australia, aren't you? And about social marketing and so on. At the end of it, these three women came up to me and looking very sort of abashed and sort of a little bit un-Australianly shy, you know. And they said, "We want to know how we can get people to love us." And I said, "What?" We're from the Australian tax office. You know? So I just want you to remember there are people who are worse off than you. Okay? But yes, the mental health is a classic example of this, isn't it? That, you know, it's something that people don't want to engage with and don't want to talk about. Nonetheless, I think there are examples. I think you were mentioning one from Australia that was quite successful in this regard. And there has been in Scotland as well as a campaign called See Me, which was all about respecting people. And I think there's ways of dealing with it that do manage to lift it up and make it uplifting. I think we've really, with all these issues, I think the marketing challenge is to find some sort of opportunity, some sort of win-win. And there almost always is, even in the most difficult of circumstances. Indeed, sometimes the most difficult circumstances can bring out the most powerful benefits and win-wins. So there isn't a straightforward answer to what you're asking. And on there is hope of achieving it. On the commercialisation side of it, I get very nervous about how commercial life has become. And I remember 20 years ago Joe DeFranza's work on tobacco marketing, which showed that it was 3-year-old American kids are as familiar with Joe Camel as they are with Mickey Mouse, I think it was. And I think Jesus Christ was several behind that. You know, so it was. There are issues about that we have to address very carefully, and I think a bit of me thinks that the fact that corporates aren't interested in mental health is perhaps a good thing. I don't know. I was just over lunch, in fact, just reading a paper that was debating this whole issue of whether children are being commercialised and whether we're becoming more materialistic as the years go by. And one of the points about that commercialisation is that kids very often don't fully understand what is going on, and a lot of the persuasion that's going on is almost implicit. And whilst you might debate about an overt advert, and maybe kids can pick up that's trying to persuade them, something that's more subtle like that, like product placement or sponsorship, that they're more susceptible to. And it occurs to me that it occurred to me just reading that, having heard the presentation this morning on cause-related marketing, how does a kid tease that out? So McDonald's are providing, as I saw in New Zealand once, a dental service for schools. They're sponsoring it. So there's the dental truck comes around with the dentist in it, and there's Ronald McDonald on the side. How does a kid, a 6-year-old, interpret that? What's that telling them, and indeed what's it doing for their mental health? It's a debate. So I don't have answers to your questions. They're profound, but I think we've just got to keep wrestling with them. Thank you. Yeah.
So marketing is not only about commercialization. Because if you're trying to raise funds, of course you'd like to have cooperations with the industry. But the main focus of marketing is being oriented towards the consumer, trying to identify your consumers and trying to identify or define your product that you're trying to promote, and building the environment that will make the decision, the voluntary decision of your consumer more attractive, make your product, your promoted behavior more attractive in the eyes of your consumer, based upon his knowledge and perceptions and all the other information in the environment. So it's not only about advertising. It's not only about commercialization. It's mainly about being oriented toward your consumer. And that's something you can get from marketing, and you can't get it any other place. This kind of thinking.
I want to thank all of you who remained with us. I think we all had a very special day. I especially want to thank Nurit Gutman for all of her work, and Sigal Talmon, all the work behind the scenes, and thank you all for coming. Professor Hastings, we will have you for a few more days. We're not going to leave you alone. We have many questions.
One announcement. כל היום הזה הוא יהיה באינטרנט, בווידאו. It's all going to be video and internet. עוד יומיים שלושה. באתר של מכון מרחב, ואפשר יהיה לצרפת לינקים למקומות. תודה רבה למשרד הבריאות.
Thank you.